people who live rurally, what's the scariest experience you've had that you can't explain? My mom lives out in the woods, pretty much completely isolated. At night, it's pitch black, no streetlights, no neighboring houses, just the narrow road that leads up to her place. One night, she woke up to the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. And then, 3 deliberate knocks on the front door. She called out, "Hello," but there was nothing. No movement, no reply. Just silence. It might not sound like much, but I can't imagine waking up to that in the dead of night with no one else around. I'd be terrified. About 15 years ago, I worked a summer seasonal job with the U.S. Forest Service in western Colorado. I was living alone in an old ranger station. One night, I had a dream that someone was pacing around the cabin while I lay in bed. I woke up the next morning to find the front door wide open. For the rest of the summer, I never slept without a large knife within reach. Out in semi-rural Australia, I can't say it's unexplainable, but it's incredibly frustrating how often I find random bullet holes in shed iron, solar panels, P2P radio dishes, and all sorts of other stuff. The holes aren't clean, they're tumbled or keyhole in shape, which makes me think they weren't fired directly at the targets, maybe coming in at a 45 degrees angle from miles away or something. The thought of one of those stray rounds actually hitting me would completely ruin the peace out here. I grew up on a small property in regional Australia, about 3 to 4 kilometers out of town. It wasn't far, but far enough that we rarely saw anyone. We were at the end of a dead-end street, tucked behind another road off the main drag, so I can't ever recall seeing a pedestrian near the house. One night, when I was around 12, I was sitting in front of the TV when 2 of my older brothers came downstairs and asked, "Did you hear that?" I hadn't noticed anything, but apparently they had heard footsteps outside and a couple of hushed voices. My brothers were both around 20 at the time, big rugby players, and their plan was simple. I stay inside while they ran out to tackle whoever it was before calling the cops. They sprinted from the front door at the same time, splitting in opposite directions to wrap around the house, probably expecting to meet again with some intruder in a headlock. If you've seen the movie Signs, imagine Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix running around the house. Yeah, that kind of energy. They never found anyone. I still swear they heard voices, but no one ever showed themselves. Our property has dense bushland right up to the house, so our best guess is that whoever it was melted back into the trees and waited for the coast to clear before disappearing. The whole thing freaked me out, and honestly, it still does when I think about it. I was camping alone in the middle of the North Dakota plains when a storm rolled in. I took shelter in my tent under a small stand of trees, and a strange, uneasy feeling started creeping over me. At the time, I had 2 phones with me. One was connected to the internet for navigation, and the other was just for cell reception. This was back in 2013. Out of nowhere, one of the phones started ringing. I glanced at the caller ID, and my blood ran cold. The incoming call was coming from the other phone, which was closed and resting in my hand. I don't know if it was some kind of glitch, but in that moment, with the storm howling around me and the isolation of the plains pressing in, it felt completely otherworldly. I live out in the country, about an hour from the nearest supermarket. A few months ago, I was trying to fall asleep in my recliner when my eyes snapped open. In the dim light, I saw a solid black figure standing just beyond the corner of the chair. It bent at the waist and twisted its neck in this unnatural way, like it was trying to get a good look at me at eye level. I panicked, and all I could manage to do was yell, What? What? And just like that, it was gone. At first, I told myself it must have been a dream. But then I noticed my German Shepherd cowering under the foot of the recliner, a spot he had never hidden in during his 6 years of life. For the next few weeks, he stayed there every time I sat in that chair. I live in a semi-rural village, houses and shops, but surrounded by wide open fields. The area is dotted with Neolithic and Bronze Age monuments, easily 1,000 within a 5-mile radius. There's one prehistoric grave nearby that's open to the elements, the original contents having been moved to the museum. One day, I climbed into it to get a photo taken. My dog, an old and usually placid black lab, suddenly went completely on high alert. He barked and bristled like I was in serious danger, directly at me, right inside the burial cyst. Even now, thinking back to that moment still sends a shiver down my spine. Maybe it was a snake. Maybe something else. I'll never know. I worked as a live-in caretaker for a 94-year-old woman with Alzheimer's for about a year and a half. Marie had moved into her daughter's home, deep in the woods of remote Washington. She often spoke of strange things. Her deceased sister, mother, and husband were around the house or outside regularly. Having worked with dementia patients for years, I didn't find this unusual. Marie was terrified of the surrounding woods. She warned me about dangerous animals and how easy it would be to get lost if I ventured out, insisting I always stay inside. She also fretted about her mother and husband traveling through the trees. Again, this wasn't alarming given her condition. After 6 or 7 months, I started waking to her walking the halls at night. Sundowning is common in Alzheimer's patients, so I wasn't concerned at first. But she began going to a particular window and giggling, as if someone were outside with her. When I asked what she was doing, she said, "My mother is out there." Strange, but not unheard of. One winter night, her daughter and I were jolted awake by the house alarm blaring. We checked all the doors and windows, locked, undisturbed. The only thing missing was Marie. Panicked, I ran outside while her daughter continued searching the house. The snow was pristine, no tracks, no sign she had left the house. After 10 to 15 minutes of yelling and searching the woods, I turned back toward the house, thinking the worst. That's when I saw her, standing outside the window she normally visited at night, giggling. Not a single footprint in the snow surrounded her. She wasn't cold. She didn't even seem aware she had gone outside. After that night, her window visits became more frequent and less joyful. She'd scream at whatever, or whoever, she believed was there. Then, just as suddenly, they stopped. One of my last conversations with Marie before she passed haunted me. She whispered, "Don't let them take me into those woods." I hope they didn't. My girlfriend lived way out in the desert, in the middle of nowhere, and I often spent nights out there. Her place was near a state penitentiary, which, unsurprisingly, had the occasional escapee. This was back before cell phones and instant alerts, so whenever someone got out, police helicopters would fly low over the area, shouting over megaphones. In the absolute quiet of the open desert, being suddenly woken by a voice screaming from the sky was jarring. Heart racing, we'd all leap out of bed to double-check every lock and window, ears straining for any other signs of danger. It was terrifying and oddly exhilarating at the same time. When I was a kid, I went camping behind my buddy's house. Out of nowhere, we heard the most bone-chilling screech, like two huge pieces of metal being scraped together. My hands shook as I fumbled to unzip the tent, and we bolted straight for the house. Even inside, I couldn't shake the fear. I kept expecting something to crash through a window. It was probably a cougar or mountain lion, though they're extremely rare in that area. Still, I'll never forget how utterly terrifying that sound was. I sometimes sleep with the windows open in winter, since I live about 3 stories up. At night, you can hear the deer moving through the woods. They mostly travel after dark where I live. At first, it was unsettling, but over the years I got used to it. One night, though, something sounded different. The deer were there, but there was something else, moving through the leaves so fast it barely made a sound. Then came the alarmed snorts, thuds, and a sudden chorus of barking as the deer scattered. After that, I heard dragging and snorting noises that made my palms sweat beneath the blanket. I was frozen with fear, too terrified to move. Eventually, the sound stopped, and I closed the windows and went back to bed. The next morning, there wasn't much to see, just some disturbed dirt, but that night taught me a lesson. If you go into the woods, take a flashlight and a weapon. And whatever you do, don't go alone. My mom lives out in the woods with my young nephew, in a tiny house surrounded by complete darkness at night. One night, she woke to the sound of banging against the house. Heart racing, she waited, trying to convince herself it was just the wind. Eventually, she mustered the courage to peek out her bedroom window and froze. A massive buck was there, slamming its head against the siding, then backing up and rearing again, over and over. The rhythm of it, echoing through the quiet woods, was terrifying. I grew up in rural southeast Kansas. When my friends and I were around 10 to 14, we decided to explore a shallow creek and small forest about a mile from my best friend's house at night. We had a few pellet guns and maybe a knife between us, nothing serious. Almost immediately, we felt it, the unmistakable sense of being watched. Something was moving in the shadows, but none of us could spot it. A primal dread set in, and we huddled close, eyes scanning in every direction. We bolted through the forest into the tall grass prairie leading back to the house. I glanced back at the tree lean and swore I saw a long tail disappear into a bush. My heart was hammering as I barked at my friends to stay close, and we made it home without incident. Later, my friend's dad, who worked with local parks and rec and knew the fish and game folks, told us the official story. There are no big cats in southeast Kansas. But quietly, he admitted there had been rumors of a lone, untracked male prowling the area. I live out in the country, and it's strange how both of my dogs will suddenly lock onto something. They'll bolt to a spot in the yard, completely focused, hackles up, growling and snarling, and there's absolutely nothing there. Nothing at all. They aren't sniffing the ground or digging, they're staring upward. A few weeks later, it happens again, in a completely different part of the property. And again, and again. This has been going on for years now. Even the new dogs I've gotten join in, reacting the same way. Whatever it is, it feels like something unseen is here with us. When I was 8, living in extremely rural Appalachia, 45 miles from the nearest anything, perched on top of a mountain, I had an experience I'll never forget. It was a winter evening, freshly fallen snow outside, around 9 p.m. My dad and I were sitting on the couch watching Sightings, that old 90s show about alien encounters, which terrified me already. Suddenly, there was a knock 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 at the window. Keep in mind, it was pitch black outside, so whatever it was could see in, but we couldn't see out. Dad told me to stay right there with the telephone beside me, and he ran outside with a mag light to investigate. He locked the door behind him and gave me strict instructions. If he didn't come back in 5 minutes, call the police. I was frozen with fear. He circled the house and returned, shrugging it off as probably an animal. But immediately afterward, he grabbed the long-corded phone in the next room and called his best friend to come check it out. He thought I'd been absorbed in the TV, but I heard everything. He said, "I'm telling you, there was a knock, like someone wanted in, but there were no footprints." I'm in my late 30s now, and I still get chills thinking about it. I grew up in rural East Texas around 1972 or 73. I was 10, and one of my chores was checking the mailbox, a long walk down the dirt road. My mother's dachshund, Gracie, always came along. One summer afternoon, a coyote was lying beside the mailbox. As we approached, it started hopping around like it wanted to play. Gracie yapped excitedly and wagged her tail, but I scooped her up and bolted back home. The next day, same thing. On the third day, I wasn't paying attention, and Gracie darted too close. 2 larger coyotes emerged from the tall grass and carried her off. A couple of days later, I walked down to the mailbox again, and there it was, the same coyote, in the exact same spot. As I got close, it began hopping and frolicking again, like it wanted to play with me. We had only recently moved from the city, and from that day forward, every time I went outside, Gracie jumped up to go with me. My grandmother always said she believed those walks were Gracie's way of keeping me safe. While living in Japan, I went on a mountain trip with a friend. One evening, we wandered into an unfamiliar area and came across a torii gate, but immediately beyond it was an unscalable rock face. It felt strange. Torii gates are meant to mark passages, symbolic thresholds. Instinctively, we both looked up at the sky. Somewhere just above the earth, a vast, multicolored light appeared, hovering silently. It glowed like a gaseous prism, radiating every color of the spectrum before vanishing as suddenly as it had come. Neither of us could explain what we had seen, but both of us felt that something profoundly significant had occurred. The feeling lingered, strange, otherworldly, and unforgettable. Our 2 normally calm black Labradors woke me in the middle of the night, growling and barking with a ferocity I had never heard from them before. My bedroom was on the ground floor, and their fear was palpable. We lived in the countryside, with a large common and woods stretching behind the house. I went into the kitchen, and they were fixated on the back door, their hackles raised, making it clear they were terrified. My own hair stood on end. I grabbed a torch and, thinking it might be an intruder, armed myself with a fire poker before opening the door. The moment I stepped outside, the dogs bolted into another room, clearly spooked. I poked my head and the torch into the darkness, and, for just a split second, I caught the reflection of enormous eyes, somewhere in the garden about 10 meters away. They blinked once, turned, and disappeared into the night. There is literally nothing in England that could explain what I saw. I slammed the door shut, and the 3 of us spent the rest of the night in my bedroom, half paralyzed with fear. A few days later, the local paper reported mysterious sheep deaths on a farm just a mile away, ripped apart as if by a massive predator. I lived and worked in the southern coastal town of Albany in Western Australia for several years, traveling frequently to rural communities across the region. One afternoon, I was heading home along a long, flat stretch of Albany Highway when I came up behind a farmer in his old Uda, Australian for pickup truck. I pulled out to overtake him, which was pretty routine for country driving. But as I merged back into the lane ahead of him, I instinctively checked my rearview mirror and froze. The road behind me was completely empty. There was no car, no shadows, nothing. And this was broad daylight, around 1 p.m., no sun in my eyes, no side roads I could have missed. I had been doing about 110 kilometers per hour, which meant he was likely around 90 to 100 kilometers per hour. There was no way he could have slowed down, turned off, or vanished without me noticing. The landscape was flat, open paddocks on either side, no trees to obscure anything. I've thought about it countless times over the last 25 years, and I still can't explain it. It was like something out of a Stephen King novel, normal one moment, utterly inexplicable the next. Even recalling it now gives me the chills. This is the first time I've told the story in decades, and it still freaks me out, but it really happened. This wasn't exactly terrifying, but at the time, when I was about 10, it was pretty unsettling. I was staying with my grandparents, who lived out in the middle of nowhere. One day, a man knocked on their door. He asked for directions to town, which already seemed odd, because their house is at the very end of a dead-end road. The only way up there is from town. He obviously knew exactly where he was going. After giving him directions, he simply said thanks, but instead of getting back in his car, he bolted straight into the woods, running as fast as he could. My grandparents called the police, but he was never found. His car was still sitting in their driveway, abandoned, and he never came back for it. To this day, we have no idea what happened. I grew up on a small, old ranch in California. The house had lots of windows to stay cool in the summer, and almost all the rooms opened into the central living room. I was probably 14, my brother was 11, and my mom had gone out that night on an errand. My brother and I were in the living room together. He was sitting by the stove, I was lying on the sofa, both of us doing homework. Inside, the lights were on, but outside it was pitch black. As I read, I heard heavy footsteps on the mud porch leading up to the front door. It was an old house, and I could hear them clearly, but I hadn't seen or heard my mom's car. In the country, you notice a car coming, headlights, engine noise, tires on the dirt road. But there was nothing. Just the footsteps, stopping at the front door. No knock. I froze. If I got up and peeked through the kitchen, I would have seen whoever it was standing at the door through the window, but they would have seen me. If I spoke to my brother, they would hear me. In the dark, anyone could have been watching through the windows, but we couldn't see out. My heart was pounding as I thought through my options. The person was at the only door in or out, which was always unlocked. If I went for a knife in the kitchen, they would know I saw them. We couldn't hide. The house was too small. My best choice was to pretend nothing was happening and wait, ready for whatever came next. After a few minutes, the footsteps stopped. I calmed slightly, convincing myself I might have imagined it. About 20 minutes later, my mom's car arrived. I ran outside, still terrified and wanting to tell her what happened. But before I could, she asked, "Who left the water on?" I looked, and the front yard spigot was on, shooting water several feet into the air. My brother and I had used it as a sort of fountain, but tonight it had been turned on by someone else. Someone had been on our porch that night. They had seen us alone, no car in the drive. They hadn't come inside, but they had made sure we knew they could have. Oh man, I've got a story for you. Stick around until the end. My family and I once lived in a small plot deep in some of our family's woods. No one could see our place, just trees all around. My extended family lived nearby, down a dirt road, but our little clearing was completely dark at night. We had no streetlights, so once the sun set, it was pitch black. One evening, I noticed a strange light above the trees. At first, I thought it was a star, but it didn't behave like one. It swayed, rose quickly, disappeared completely, then descended behind the trees. This went on for several days, and I was the only one who had noticed it. Around that time, my dad hired some guys to help him build a deck. One of them, a guy my husband sort of knew, would occasionally stay for dinner after work. Strangely, the light seemed to get closer whenever this guy was there. It hovered at tree level, not in the sky, and I could see it clearly behind the trees. Eventually, I showed it to my husband, kids, and the guy. My daughter, ever playful, decided to interact with it. She said, "Follow me if you're an alien," and walked to the left. The light followed. She went right, it went right. Again, she turned right, it followed. I was absolutely freaked out. The guy? So scared, he left. And the light followed him. I kid you not, it followed him back to the woods where he lived, just a short distance from us, separated only by trees. For 4 days, the light would follow him whenever he left. I was terrified he was about to get abducted, and I would stare out the window for hours, half expecting a signs moment. Then one night, the man didn't come, but the light was still there. My fear boiled over. I yelled at it. "What's your problem? What do you want?" It seemed to follow me as I backed away, and when I flipped it off, it dove toward me, or at least, that's what it felt like. I thought I'd angered aliens, and they were about to crash into me. Then, just as suddenly, it vanished. I told my dad what was happening. He laughed and asked if I was on crack. I got irate and explained that no, I wasn't. Eventually, he gave me a shotgun and said, "Shoot it next time you see it, if it's real." But I didn't. Somehow, firing a shotgun at a flying light in the woods seemed like a bad idea. The light only appeared when the man was around. Once he left, it vanished. I lived in terror of aliens for the rest of our time there. Years later, I stumbled across a local news article that explained the lights. The police had been using drones to catch drug dealers. Suddenly, everything clicked. That man who had been visiting us. Not long after the deck was finished, he was arrested on drug charges and linked to the local Mexican mafia. For months, I had been terrified of aliens, when in reality, it was likely just a bored cop flying a drone. If I had fired that shotgun like my dad suggested, I might have ended up in prison. I still think about it sometimes. Those terrifying nights in the dark woods weren't aliens. They were just humans, doing their job in a way I couldn't have imagined at the time. My wife and I were staying in a cabin in a small, rural mountain town. Around 8 p.m., an air raid style siren started wailing, loud and persistent. At first, we joked about a zombie apocalypse, but after a few minutes, the humor wore off. We had no idea what it was warning about, and it was starting to feel a little unsettling. I threw on my coat and grabbed a few pots, just in case, and walked down the road to a tiny grocery store nearby. I went inside and asked if anyone knew what the siren was for. The clerk looked at me blankly. "What siren?" I stepped back outside, and the noise had vanished. Just like that. No explanation, no warning, nothing. We never figured out what it was, but for the rest of the night, every creak of the cabin made us a little jumpy. Back in Cozumel, Mexico, I was driving a truck through a completely uninhabited area on the way to a beach when I saw something that still haunts me. It crossed the road in front of me and darted into the jungle, an utterly bizarre figure that looked like a stick figure with an oversized head. It ran on its hind legs, completely black, and moved with an almost unnatural speed. I've researched every animal native to the island, and nothing even comes close. I've since moved away, but even my friends who still live there have no idea what it could have been, despite my sketches of the creature. To this day, I have no explanation for what I saw. My dad used to rent a house way out in the middle of nowhere, about 45 minutes from the nearest town, with the closest neighbor another 15 minutes away. On the property were several pheasant enclosures owned by the landlord. My dad had no responsibility for them other than to notify the owner if anything went wrong. One morning, he noticed something horrifying. In the furthest enclosure, home to around 50 birds, every single pheasant had been slaughtered overnight. Strangely, none had been eaten. This wasn't a predator, this was deliberate. The property had cameras, and what they captured was chilling. In the dead of night, a man neither of them recognized wandered onto the property. He ignored the house entirely, crawled under the enclosure fence, and systematically stabbed each bird with a knife while wearing a headlamp. The footage showed him entering, killing the birds, and leaving, all in the span of a few hours. The police were called, but nothing ever came of it. My dad was so rattled that he had us stay with our mom for weeks while he slept with a gun. The property owner tightened security, new fences, alarms, and even guard dogs that were friendly during the day but formidable otherwise. Nothing ever happened again, and the bird-killing maniac was never found. I live way out in the country, and normally, nothing really phases me. But one night, I was walking after dark when my flashlight died. I took only a few steps in the pitch black before I heard it, coyotes howling right nearby. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. My hair stood on end, my body froze with fear, and every instinct screamed at me to move, but I couldn't. The sound was haunting, wild, and impossibly close. I made it home safely, but I'll never forget that eerie chorus. If you've never heard coyotes howling at night, you're missing one of the most spine-tingling sounds out there. I live alone in the woods, about 15 minutes from town. My neighbors are nearby, but not close enough to hear or see what happens at my place. One summer morning, around 4:30 a.m., I woke to a strange, pounding noise. It was still the dusky light of dawn, and I was groggy, half in a daze. Then I heard it, a man's voice, shouting, "Somebody help me." I peeked out the upstairs windows, but couldn't see anything clearly. My home has no window coverings, so there's no hiding. I went downstairs and finally caught a glimpse of him, a man, nearly naked, wearing just a thin t-shirt, running erratically around my house. He was frantically jiggling doors and windows, screaming for help, darting from one side of the house to the other, desperate to get inside. Normally, I'd help someone in need. But this felt unpredictable, dangerous, and I couldn't risk letting him in. I managed to contact my neighbors, who were closer than the police, and rushed over. By the time they arrived, he had vanished into the trees. The RCMP picked him up shortly after, but I still have no idea what he was doing or why he was running around my house in that state. My wife, kids, and I live about 30 miles outside of town on 100 acres. The house sits half a mile off the main road. When we moved in, my wife wanted full security, so we installed a gate with a driveway doorbell, cameras at the gate and house, a full alarm system, and even got 2 puppies. I've spent my whole life out in the country, so I'm used to hog squeals, coyote screams, deer huffing, and all the usual night noises. One night around 2 a.m., a loud crash pierced the quiet, immediately followed by the house alarm blaring. The keypad in our bedroom indicated the glass break sensor in our son's room had tripped. Heart racing, I grabbed the shotgun we keep for rattlesnakes and ran down the hall, yelling for my wife to grab our youngest from the crib just in case. I could hear our oldest screaming, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the doorknob. Adrenaline completely took over. I flung the door open, letting out a war cry to intimidate any intruder. Glass was scattered across the floor, our son clinging to the crib rails, the cold winter air cutting through the room. I shut the door behind me, grabbed him, and checked the bathroom, the closet, anywhere an intruder could be. I called my wife again. Our system for alerting each other without tipping off anyone inside was working, and she responded that she was alone and okay. I handed her the shotgun and grabbed my rifle and flashlight, scanning the house inside and out. When I reached the broken window, my adrenaline began to fade, and my mind raced. It had to be a deer, right? Maybe he saw his reflection in the glass, tried to charge it, and broke the window. I combed the property high and low. No footprints, no disturbance. I checked the cameras, nothing. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. It took weeks before my son slept alone again. I'm fairly certain it was just a deer, but I can't shake the thought that someone could have broken the window, heard the alarm, and bolted before we arrived. There was a blind spot covering that window at the time. Since then, I've added more cameras, pointing down every side of the house to cover all windows and entrances, motion-sensing floodlights on all four corners, and my favorite security measure, one of our pups sleeps right next to our son's bed every night. There was a trail I liked that ended at a stream, a spot where people sometimes skinny dipped. It was a scorching summer day, and I was hiking alone, wanting to cool off before continuing. I made a point to stay away from anyone else. I saw a couple sunbathing downstream, so I headed upstream to find some privacy. Downstream, a lone man was walking the trail, so I stepped off to let him pass, assuming he'd continue on. I finally found a secluded alcove, stripped down, and stepped into the water. Relief washed over me, until, to my horror, the same man reappeared. He was only a foot behind me, completely naked, and started trying to make conversation. My heart hammered. I muttered something, scrambled out of the water, and got dressed as fast as I could. I've never moved so quickly in my life. There was no cell service, and instinct screamed that I was in danger. I was still about 3 miles from my car, but I didn't stop running until I reached it. One night around midnight, I was driving a friend home along a lonely country road between our villages. As we approached a small bridge, I noticed a low, cloud-like mist drifting slowly across the road. I assumed it was just fog, pretty normal for the area. But as we drove through it, something completely unnerved me. The fog didn't move around the car. We moved through it, and it seemed to flow right through us. I jumped a mile. My friend, who hadn't been watching the road closely, also saw it pass between us and disappear behind the car. Even now, years later, I still can't explain what we saw. I used to own 5 acres of land, surrounded only by a cow field, no neighbors for miles. I've always sung silly songs to my dogs, mostly inside the house since they're indoor pups. One of my favorites is the nursery rhyme, Daisy, Daisy. One crisp fall evening, I was alone with the windows open. Faintly, I heard a low, deliberate whistle. It was unmistakably the tune of Daisy, Daisy, whistled slowly and carefully. When the verse ended, the whistling stopped. I was too terrified to look outside, and I never will know what, or who, was out there. When I was young, I lived far out from town, about 50 kilometers to the nearest store, so we rarely saw anyone. I was around 11 when my mom left me home alone for a couple of days to attend an equine show. I was thrilled, got to stay up late playing video games, no adults around. Around 1 a.m., I headed to my room to get ready for bed. I flicked on the light, and through my window, I saw it, a tall, human-shaped shadow, maybe 7 feet tall, moving past my window. It was pitch black outside, yet somehow I could make out its outline in the darkness. The veranda outside was old and creaky. Even our 20-kilogram dog made it groan under its paws. But this thing moved completely silently. It didn't stop, didn't look in my window when the light came on, just walked past as if I wasn't even there. What terrified me most was where it was headed. Walking in that direction would have taken it off the veranda into the horse stables, which always triggered the automatic lights, but the lights never went on. I was frozen, heart hammering. I tried calling my mom, but there was no answer. In a panic, I grabbed the dogs and built a blanket fort in the living room, hiding inside until morning. I walked about a mile from home to go mushroom hunting in a familiar area. The goldenrod in the field reached up to my shoulders as I made my way toward the woods. Just as I was about to step into the tree line, something strange hit me. I can't explain it. I didn't see or hear anything, but an intense wave of unease washed over me. Goosebumps prickled my skin, and suddenly I felt like I couldn't go any further or I wouldn't make it out alive. Everything had been fine up until that point. I stood frozen, debating whether to continue, and finally decided to head somewhere else to hunt. I've returned to that spot countless times since, and never felt that same feeling again. I live in an area with bears, wolves, coyotes, and bobcats, and I've never had a problem on my hikes, but that day, something felt off. Maybe it was a wild animal, maybe a dangerous person, I'll never know. Since then, I've learned to trust that instinct. It's saved me more than once, and whenever I've ignored it, I've regretted it. Whatever it was that day, I know I made the right choice by walking away. My grandparents lived in a semi-rural area, surrounded by open fields and dark skies. One night, I was walking from a shop back to their house when something strange caught my eye, a bright green, wobbly light hovering in the sky. I pointed it out to my grandmother and asked what it could be, but she insisted she couldn't see anything. I don't know to this day whether she really didn't see it, or if she just didn't want to admit she did. Whatever it was unlike anything I've ever seen, and the memory still makes the hairs on my neck stand on end. I live out in the middle of nowhere. A couple of years ago, I let my dog out and started making breakfast. Suddenly, I heard frantic barking and yelping. I ran to the window and froze. A chaotic ball of dogs was rolling around in my yard. It was my dog and an unknown number of coyotes. I grabbed my shotgun and ran outside, but I couldn't get a clear shot without risking my dog. Barefoot in February, I chased them off as best I could. My dumb dog immediately bolted after them. A few minutes later, he returned and collapsed on the deck. At first, he seemed okay. Then I noticed a puddle of blood spreading across the wood. He was bleeding everywhere, and a massive bite on his rear thigh left a huge chunk missing. I dressed my kids, 1 and 4 at the time, and rushed him to the vet while my wife was at work. $3,500 later, he was fine, but I still have bloodstains in my truck as a grim reminder. When I was a teenager, I went to visit my aunt and cousins out in the middle of nowhere in Eagar, Arizona, right near the New Mexico border and just half a mile from the town where Fire in the Sky took place. I was obsessed with alien abduction lore and often suffered from sleep paralysis, where I'd wake up unable to move or open my eyes. One late night, after everyone had gone to bed, I put on a movie. I can't remember the name, but it was like a Blair Witch-style alien abduction flick. I was completely absorbed. The house was pitch dark except for the glow of the TV screen. Then I heard something behind me. Slowly, I turned in my reclining chair and froze. Staring back at me was a goddamn alien. My heart leapt, and I screamed as I jumped straight into the air. After a few seconds, I realized it wasn't an alien at all. It was just a half-inflated balloon left over from my cousin's birthday party. I live in rural Western Australia, and one day I was walking through the bushland on our property when I heard a sound like muffled tearing paper. So quiet, I almost didn't notice it. I turned around, and to my shock, 3 trees that had been just behind me were suddenly gone. It was immediately explainable once I got closer. A massive sinkhole had opened up. But the fact that it happened almost silently, to the point where I barely heard anything, still gives me chills. That sinkhole is still on our property, and my uncle has since built ramps on either side of it for his homemade dirt bike track. Another freaky, though explainable, event happened back in 2011. My family and I were driving home from a holiday when we rounded a corner and emerged from a patch of trees, only to be confronted with a giant wall of sand directly in front of us. It was moving so fast that I think my dad slammed on the brakes harder than ever before. We live in a densely forested area in the U.S. Northwest, almost rainforest-like. The land where we built our modest home has no recorded history of previous habitation, though Native Americans may have lived here before European colonization. Our experiences involve cats, but not living ones. Over the past 15 years, we've seen a number of them. The sightings come in bursts, several encounters over a short time, then nothing for months. These cats appear in the strangest places, perched on the toilet, near the bathroom sink, scampering quickly into or out of bedrooms, or slipping silently out the front door. Once, my daughter had a few friends over. 3 of them watched a black and white cat emerge from a bedroom and slip under a chair at the table where they were sitting. At least 9 people have seen these cats in total. They come in orange, beige, and black and white patterns. On one visit, my mother heard 2 meows in quick succession while talking, even though our one and only living cat was asleep on my lap at the time. Both my daughter and I have felt unseen cats brush against our legs while we stood at the bathroom sink. We keep our real cat's food and water there, so we know it wasn't him. Our indoor cat is an orange Manx with a stubby tail. The orange ghost cats we've seen always have normal tails. We've never owned any of these spectral cats, but we suspect they were local cats that met a bad end, perhaps taken by dogs, coyotes, or something worse. When I was about 9, I was running through the woods on a bright fall day. The sun was out, the leaves crunched underfoot, and everything seemed normal. I remember hearing shuffling footsteps nearby, and usually I would call out. I knew hunters sometimes wandered onto our land. But this time, something held me frozen. My heart went stone, and I scanned the trees until I saw it. It looked like a tall man, but with the head of a wolf. Its entire body was a shifting, black fuzziness, yet it was broad daylight. I couldn't chalk it up to shadows. I had no idea what I was looking at. The fear that shot through me that day is something I've only felt twice in my life. It didn't seem to notice me, but the moment I could move again, I ran as fast as I could. To this day, I have no idea what it was, and that was the last time I ever went into those woods. I grew up on a small island with a tiny population and lots of uninhabited areas. In high school, I loved taking night walks. Everything felt safe and quiet. One night, I was walking along a deserted road when I noticed a figure under a street lamp ahead. It was cloaked entirely in black, except for its face, which was unnaturally pale and eerily illuminated. Something about it felt profoundly wrong, like the air itself had shifted. A sense of unreality washed over me, but I felt compelled to keep moving forward. The world seemed to tilt and spin around me, yet my feet carried me closer. As I neared, the figure dropped to all fours and silently disappeared into the brush. Even now, remembering it sends chills down my spine. I still have no idea what that thing was. I've got one. Growing up in rural Ohio, I lived on a quiet stone road. On my paper route as a kid in the 80s, I would take the country roads to the nearest town, passing an old cemetery tucked in the middle of a wooded, semi-swampy area. At the back of the small cemetery was a weathered grave shaped like a Washington monument, broken at the base. The top section had fallen a few feet away. Every day, I would lift that top piece back onto its base before heading out on my route. And without fail, the next day, it would be lying exactly where I had found it. I did this every day for nearly 2 years. One day, as I approached, I noticed a tiny glint of white marble poking through the grass where the top section had been lying. Curious, I brushed away the dirt and grass and uncovered a small, hidden grave of an infant bearing the same last name as the larger monument. I never lifted that top section again. Even now, years later, every time I visit home, a few thousand miles away, the top piece still rests on that infant's grave. I went to visit my family in their village of Sentinel Butte, North Dakota. We decided to climb the butte itself, one of the highest points in the state, to get a better view of the endless flatness all around. According to local folklore, it was called Sentinel Butte because white settlers claimed they saw Native Americans perched there, watching and sending warnings when settlers were approaching. While wandering near the edge, I found a small crag and slid down into it. I was walking along a ridge next to a sheer drop, maybe 300 feet, when I reached the end and froze. Carved into the stone was a human shape, sitting, covered in what looked like bloody handprints. Beneath it lay a massive pile of small bones, birds, rabbits, and who knows what else. I could have sworn something was watching me. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up a few of the bones. That's when my cousin screamed my name. I dropped the bones and scrambled back up to the top of the butte, and that's when I saw it, a funnel cloud twisting down toward us. Luckily, it veered off, hitting the ground 45 miles away near the interstate. I never found the bloody carving or the bones again. No one in town had ever seen any rock carvings on the butte. And yet, you can't really account for everything, can you? Haha. I once witnessed a drug plane being loaded and unloaded in the middle of the night. Ever since that night, I've never gone anywhere unarmed. It happened in the American Southeast at a friend's farm that also served as his hunting camp. A few of us, just college-aged kids, were out there fishing, drinking a couple of beers, grilling burgers, and hanging out until we got tired. It was late, and right at midnight we heard the unmistakable sound of a single-engine airplane firing up. My buddy had a small airstrip about 50 to 100 yards from his cabin. We listened as the plane taxied down the strip and then lifted off into the pitch-black sky without a single light on. Seconds later, ATVs roared to life from the far end of the airstrip and started racing straight toward us. I shouted for everyone to kill the radio, shut off the lights, and get inside so we could pretend we weren't there and hadn't seen anything. I asked my friend if he had any guns. He didn't. The ATVs pulled up near the cabin and stopped, like the riders were deciding what to do about us. After a tense moment, they sped off and disappeared into the night. The creepiest part is realizing they must have been waiting the whole time for their chance to leave. They had been listening to us drink beer and carry on all evening, holding off until they couldn't wait any longer. I used to work at a state park in a small rural town. Most mornings, I'd hike in from town along one of several trails to reach my office. The trail route was the longest, but it was also the most scenic, so whenever I had extra time, I chose it. One morning, after getting off the bus at the road, I decided to take that trail. As I rounded a bend, I noticed a woman jogging ahead of me. That wasn't unusual. People ran that trail all the time. I glanced down at my phone while walking, expecting she'd pass me in a few seconds. But when I looked up, she was gone. She hadn't had time to run far enough to disappear from view, and there were no clear side paths nearby. The brush was thick on both sides, and anyone pushing through it would have made a lot of noise. I stopped, confused, scanning the area. Maybe she'd tripped or turned down a small side trail I'd missed. But there was nothing, no movement, no sound, no sign of her anywhere beneath the trees. After standing there for a few seconds, I convinced myself my mind had played a trick on me and kept walking. Farther down the trail, a small white fluffy dog suddenly popped out of some bushes. It didn't seem to have an owner nearby. I smiled and tried to get its attention as I approached. The dog looked at me, then calmly turned and started walking down the trail. A moment later, it veered off into an open patch under the trees, an area I could see clearly from where I stood. I watched it step into that open space. 1 second it was there. The next second it wasn't. Just gone. No sound. No rustling leaves. Nothing. I stood there in the quiet morning light, blinking and trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. I had seen a dog, hadn't I? And that jogger earlier, she had been real too. That's when it hit me. Neither of them had made a single sound. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened that morning. A glitch in time? My imagination? Something else entirely? I still don't know. I grew up in a rural area. We had one neighbor across the street, but his house sat at the end of a long driveway. If we'd screamed loud enough, maybe he would have heard us, maybe. One night, when I was about 12, I was babysitting my 10-year-old brother. I was upstairs watching TV while he played video games downstairs. From where I sat, I could see headlights from cars passing along the gravel road in front of our house. It was fairly busy during the day, and even at night, it wasn't unusual to see a few cars go by. But that night felt different. I noticed a car creeping slowly back and forth in front of our house. It passed once. Then again. Then it pulled into our driveway and drove around the property. My stomach dropped. I panicked, ran to make sure all the doors were locked, and kept watching from upstairs. After a few tense minutes, the car slowly pulled away, and I started to calm down. About half an hour later, though, a car came flying down the gravel road at full speed, and right behind it was a police car in pursuit. I never found out what was going on that night, but it scared me enough that I still remember the feeling. The second story isn't rural, and it's actually kind of funny. Later on, I lived in a house in the suburbs. I had installed a Ring doorbell camera because someone had been cutting my Halloween light decorations. Once Halloween passed and I'd taken everything down, I wasn't too worried about late-night activity anymore. One night, after working a night shift, I was up around 2 a.m. All my roommates were at work, so I was home alone. Suddenly, my phone started blowing up with Ring notifications saying someone was at the front door. My heart started racing. It definitely wasn't my roommates. They wouldn't be home for hours. I sat there building up the nerve to check the camera feed. When I finally opened the app, bracing myself for the worst, I saw a deer. It was just standing there peacefully, nibbling leaves off one of my front bushes. I felt relieved and a little ridiculous for having freaked out so badly. When I was in college, I went on a hike in New Hampshire that turned into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. I'd hiked a few times before, but the two friends with me had never gone hiking. One grew up in a beach town in Florida, the other was a city kid from Long Island. There was a popular trail not far from our campus, only about 2 miles or so, and we figured it would be easy. We got a late start, though, and it was fall, so sunset came quickly. I remember grabbing a random flashlight from my dorm room before we left. They didn't think to bring one, and none of us really considered how long it might take first-time hikers to get up and back down. We made it to the top without any issues. But about 10 minutes into the hike back down, it started getting dark, fast. I pulled out the flashlight, feeling pretty proud of my minimal preparation. This was before everyone had smartphones. I had a flip phone, and my friends had Blackberries. No built-in flashlights to save us. Then my flashlight started to die. The beam flickered in and out as we picked up our pace, thinking we were close to the trailhead. It wasn't fully dark yet, but it was getting there, and the woods were turning into shadows. That's when we heard it. In the distance, a shriek ripped through the trees, a sound that didn't seem human. It echoed along the trail, not super close, but not far enough to feel safe. It was gut-wrenching, unnatural, the kind of noise that makes your blood run cold. The three of us froze for a split second. Then, without even saying a word to each other, we ran. We had no idea what it was, and we didn't care. We just ran. The only sound was our feet pounding against the dirt, loud and frantic. I don't remember hearing insects or birds, just our footsteps and my own heartbeat roaring in my ears. It felt surreal, like we were being chased by something we couldn't see. Somehow, it took us less than 10 minutes to reach the parking area. Seeing her car was the biggest relief of my life. We jumped in and sped off. I barely remember the drive back. I think the mix of adrenaline, fear, and relief just shut my brain down. Strangely, none of us talked about it. No, what was that? No, that could have been really bad. I don't think we said much of anything that night, or ever, about that hike. It was too unsettling. Years later, I read a similar story online where someone suggested the sound had been a mountain lion. I looked up recordings on YouTube. The moment I heard it, I got chills. That was it. 100%. If you've never heard a mountain lion scream, it's horrifying. It doesn't even sound like it belongs in this world. Looking back, maybe running wasn't the smartest move, but in that moment, hearing that sound in the dark woods, there was no other option. I live in a city now, but when I was a kid I stayed with my grandma in a very rural part of Florida. The area had a bad reputation. People said it was a dumping ground for murder victims. I never stumbled across a body while wandering the woods, but I did experience something that stuck with me ever since. One evening around 6 p.m., just as the sun was starting to set, I was out playing near a creek when I heard faint sobbing drifting through the trees. Curious, I followed the sound. It led me to the edge of the creek, where I had to climb down a small embankment to see what was there. That's when I spotted her, a woman in a dirty white dress, leaning over the water. The moment I got a clear look at her, she suddenly started screaming at the top of her lungs, still staring down into the creek. She didn't turn toward me. She didn't acknowledge me. Just screaming into the water. I like to think I was a brave 12-year-old. I was not. I panicked and bolted out of there as fast as I could, not stopping until I was well clear of the creek. To this day, I have no idea what she was doing out there. That part of the woods was also rumored to have hidden meth labs, so that might explain some of the strange people I encountered growing up, but it doesn't make the memory any less unsettling. One Friday this past summer, my neighbor, who doesn't have any kids, cleaned the glass on her storm door. She didn't have any visitors that day. The next morning, she woke up to find what looked like 10 or 15 small, child-sized handprints covering the glass. It completely rattled her. She ended up calling the police, just in case there was a missing child in the area or something strange had happened overnight. An officer came out, took a look, and suggested it was probably raccoons. That explanation made sense, and it was likely true, but for a while, the idea of all those tiny handprints appearing out of nowhere was genuinely unsettling. Then there was the night in the summer of 2020 when I made the mistake of stepping onto my porch around 11 p.m. I was about to take the trash out to the dumpster across my backyard when I suddenly felt like something was out there with me. I froze. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps and the sound of something moving around in the yard. It didn't sound like a person. I immediately backed up, left the trash on the screened-in porch, and locked the door as fast as I could. Since then, I avoid going outside after dark whenever I can. There have been reports of black bears in the area recently, so maybe that's what I heard. I've never actually seen one around here myself, but whatever was out there that night was big enough to make me think twice about stepping outside again. I grew up in rural Maine. One afternoon, I was out mowing my mom's lawn when I spotted something unusual in the grass, a small cluster of live rifle cartridges scattered near the edge of the yard. They were .308 rounds, a caliber we didn't even own. It was a strange thing to find just lying there, especially since no one in our house had that type of rifle. I remember staring at them for a second, realizing how easily I could have run them over with the mower. I was just glad I saw them before the blades did. When I was a kid, I once heard a flute playing deep in the woods behind my house. The melody was unbelievably beautiful, soft, haunting, and almost hypnotic. Without really thinking, I started walking toward it. It felt strange, like I wasn't fully in control of myself. I just followed the music, step after step, as if it were pulling me in. The deeper I went, the clearer it seemed, drifting through the trees like it was meant only for me. Then my dog suddenly barked and bumped into me, snapping me out of whatever daze I was in. The music stopped instantly. Just silence. No rustling, no footsteps, nothing. I still don't know what I heard that day, but it felt like I'd almost wandered too far, like something had been luring me in. Even now, every once in a while, I'll catch what sounds like a faint flute on the wind, carried from somewhere deep in the distance. I grew up living about 30 miles off the main road, surrounded entirely by private land. There were no neighbors nearby, no random traffic, just open property and complete privacy. Our living room had huge panel windows that overlooked the land, and at night, with the inside lights on and the outside pitch black, it felt like you were sitting in a glowing box in the middle of nowhere. One night, I was up late watching a monster truck rally on TV. The living room lights were on, but outside it was completely dark. Out of nowhere, two men walked up to the window and slammed their hands against the glass. They stared straight at me. I could hear them clearly telling me to let them in. Calmly. Casually. Then they slowly turned and began walking toward the front door, which connected directly to the living room. The doorway was wide, with a thick frame that briefly blocked my view as they passed behind it. But once they disappeared behind the door frame, everything went silent. No footsteps. No knocking. Nothing. I moved to a different angle so I could see the front door area clearly. They were gone. There was nowhere for them to hide. No sound of anyone running off. It was as if they had simply vanished. For a moment, I genuinely questioned whether I had imagined the whole thing. But I can still remember the way they moved, slow, deliberate, and the blank, dead look in their eyes. That's the part that still feels the strangest. I had an experience that was either sleep paralysis or something eerily close. My room was split level, and I woke up to my dog barking under the blankets. At first, it was just those soft little precursor barks, so I rolled over. Nothing unusual. The clock read 3:11 a.m., and as I shifted, it clicked 3:12. Then I noticed a car slowly moving down our long driveway, maybe 150 yards. I could see it creeping along while I stayed frozen in bed. My dog's barks escalated, sharper this time, but I couldn't move. Only my head could turn. Through the light from upstairs, I saw our front door wide open, and in that glow, a dark shadow came flying down the stairs. In an instant, it seemed to leap straight at me. I shot upright, heart pounding, fully awake. My dog gave a little precursor bark, and everything clicked. The alarm said 3:11 again, then 3:12, and a car was rolling down the driveway. It was just my mom stumbling home from a night out, talking that 3 a.m. Drunk nonsense. Bonus story, the same house was broken into once. I just finished a 12-hour shift, completely exhausted, and came home to find a window smashed and the door slightly ajar. I called my mom while cautiously walking through the house. She asked, "Are they still there?" I started backing out slowly and said, "I actually don't know." That night really showed me how differently people react to the same situation. I went straight to annoyed, skipping scared altogether. Another thought, I might not be the only 30-something who had Blair Witch permanently scar them. I grew up camping along our creek, tents and all, but after that movie, being alone in the woods always felt off. My dogs helped, but they also made it worse. Farm dogs are always on alert, so every squirrel, every rustle, could be witches or skinwalkers. Country life has a strange darkness, the quiet, the shadows, the way moonlight amplifies mischief. Final story. If someone comes to your door offering to sell you something or help for free, they might actually be casing your house. This happened to us in California. My wife was oblivious and almost started a tour, but I had to make a big show of kicking them out. In rural living, stuff like that is just part of the reality. Strangers at your door are rarely harmless. I lived in the country for a few years, and most of the time it was peaceful. Strange things were rare, and usually there was a simple explanation. But one night stands out clearly in my memory. My mom and stepdad were out, and my grandma, who lived with us, was sitting in the living room waiting for them to return. The TV was off, and my brother wasn't home. It was just the two of us. Earlier, a farm up the road had set off some fireworks, so it wasn't completely quiet, but eventually the sounds died down. Then I heard it, something clinking against the gutter drain at the front corner of the house, followed by a light tapping on the exterior wall of the living room. My grandma, naturally jumpy, tried to ignore it. But with some recent vandalism reported nearby, I decided to peek out the window. The yard was pitch black, nothing visible. I grabbed my stepdad's pistol, stepped onto the front porch, and stood quietly, listening. There was nothing unusual, so I went back inside, told my grandma it was probably just an animal, and put the gun away. After she went to her room, the tapping started again. This time I was smarter. I grabbed the pistol and a flashlight. As I approached the door, the tapping turned into heavy thumping, moving up the wall and across the roof. I've seen raccoons climb walls before, but this was different. The thuds were heavier, deliberate, almost coordinated. As the noise moved across the roof toward the back of the house, I decided it wasn't worth investigating further. I relatched the door and went down to my basement room, listening until it faded. The next morning, I went outside to inspect. There were a few disturbed patches of dirt near the drain and a mark on the wall where something had hit it. But nothing explained the noise. No footprints, no sign of an animal, nothing that could point to a cause. And it never happened again. My sisters are twins. One of them was put under anesthesia, and at that exact same moment, the other sister, who was at home, suddenly fainted. Just a minute later, my father called to say that the surgery had started. It's incredible how connected twins can be. I was fishing alone on a river just outside a tiny town in Colorado. It was dusk, and I was standing in the middle of the stream, about 10 to 15 feet downstream from a bridge, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement on the bridge. There were a few ranch houses nearby, though none of them seemed occupied. At first, judging by the size and motion, I assumed it was a German shepherd from one of the properties. I turned my head for a better look, and that's when it stopped crossing the bridge. It was standing right at the edge, directly above me, staring. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a dog. It was a large mountain lion, and it had the high ground. I yelled as loud as I could, "I see you." The cat froze for a few seconds, then slowly turned and disappeared from sight, walking away from the bridge. It was almost dark, my heart was racing, and I had no idea where the cougar had gone. I needed to get back to my truck, parked a few yards past the bridge on the right side of the river. The most direct path would have taken me under the bridge through thick brush, a perfect ambush spot, and I wasn't thrilled about taking it, especially since the cougar hadn't seemed spooked by my shout. Instead, I went up the left bank, which was clear of vegetation, though it meant retracing the direction the cat had come from and crossing over the bridge itself. I sang loudly as I walked, constantly glancing over my shoulder. I made it to my truck, changed out of my waders, packed up my rod as fast as I could, and drove off. I never saw the mountain lion again, but after that encounter, I bought a .357 to carry whenever I fish alone. I don't live in a rural area, but I spend a lot of time working in remote parts of the U.S. I used to work as a field archaeologist, and out in the middle of nowhere, on mountaintops, deep in forests, or in swampy areas, you sometimes stumble across strange things. Once, while doing high-altitude survey work in the Colorado mountains, I had one of those moments. We were in an alpine forest, 3 of us spread out along parallel survey lines. Every 50 meters, we dig a 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters hole, hand screen the soil, and record the soil type, any artifacts, and other notes on a form. We do this for miles and miles, 10 hours a day, the day-to-day grind of archaeology. I was on the far right survey line, climbing over boulders and pushing through trees toward the ridgeline. I stepped down off a boulder into a small opening in the field and noticed an old tree with symbols carved into its bark. They were clearly recarved repeatedly over time. At the base of the tree was a small, but well-defined, stone circle. Surrounding it were small wooden figures made from twisted twigs and tiny wooden bowls filled with food and dark liquid, almost like offerings. I called my survey partners over. We took photos and documented it on a cultural site form, noting that it was modern. Even so, the site gave me the creeps. There were animal bones included in the shrine, and the whole setup felt unnerving. When I was in college, I was driving home from work around midnight. I lived in a super rural area, and my car had a large moonroof. I stopped at a stop sign about a mile outside of town, surrounded only by corn and soybean fields. Suddenly, an insanely bright light descended directly onto my car. It was so intense that I couldn't even tell where it was coming from when I looked up. At first, I thought it might be one of the Samaritan helicopters that occasionally flew over our area. They used massive spotlights when searching for accident victims in the snow. But this light was nothing like that. It was blinding, almost unreal. I slowly started to turn toward town, and then the light shot forward at incredible speed, expanding in a way that looked straight out of a sci-fi movie, and then vanished completely. The next thing I knew, I was crossing the bridge into town, about a mile from where I had last remembered being. Years ago, my wife and I were camping in my parents' backyard in rural, heavily forested southern Missouri. I was telling her stories about all the strange and wild things I'd seen and heard growing up in that area. I'd spent much of my childhood hiking and spelunking, so I was explaining how, as long as you know what to watch for in the woods, it's usually pretty safe. Then it happened. The constant chorus of insects, frogs, and general forest noises just stopped. Instantly. Dead silence. I grabbed her hand and hustled her inside the house as fast as I could. Once the door was locked, I said, and that's exactly what you need to be aware of. When the forest goes completely silent, it means something big and dangerous is nearby. And we don't want to be out there. Being from Phoenix, Arizona, she had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. If you want truly rural, come to Ireland. I once had a job putting up road signs, and we were at a junction in the middle of nowhere when a man suddenly appeared. He was dressed in a full suit, looking perfectly dapper and professional, carrying an old-fashioned doctor's bag. He introduced himself as a doctor, and then, without warning, jumped straight into a briar-filled hedgerow, tore through it, and vanished across a field. My coworker and I just stood there, mouths open, trying to peel our jaws off the ground in shock. When I was about 14, I lived with my grandparents in the country. I had 2 dogs, Jax, an English Mastiff, and Blue, a mini Aussie/Corgi mix. One night, I was lying in bed when suddenly both dogs went completely berserk, barking at something outside in the darkness. I opened the door to let them out, and they bolted straight into the night. I spent about 15 minutes calling for them, but they didn't come back. About 45 minutes later, I called again, and Blue eventually emerged from the darkness, coming from the same direction they had run. I kept calling for Jax a little longer, and finally he came inside. But something was off. He walked into the doorway of my room and just stood there, growling quietly. I didn't know what was going on, so I cautiously walked toward him. About 2 feet away, he suddenly erupted into the most vicious growl he had ever given me, and he had never acted like this before. I backed off to my bed, but he stayed there, staring at me. For the rest of the night, I couldn't get anywhere near him without him growling. I have no idea what spooked him, but whatever it was definitely not normal. My grandmother, mother, and aunts always said it was death knocking at the door. This is a third-hand story about my grandfather's passing. He was in the VA hospital, severe diabetes from years of alcohol, both legs amputated above the knees, in his 70s. My youngest 2 aunts were home alone while my grandmother drove to the hospital to visit him. The house had side lights flanking the front door, and the stairs looked down directly into that area. From upstairs, my aunts heard 3 sharp knocks at the door. When they looked down, no one was there. The knocks continued, always in sets of 3, until one of them, thinking it might be a prank, finally opened the door. After that, the knocking stopped. When my grandmother returned home, they told her what had happened. Furious, she rushed back to the hospital, a 2-hour drive by day, to find that my grandfather had died after she left. The family later claimed that my grandfather haunted the house, but they never believed the knocking was him asking to be let in. My mother always told me, if you ever hear knocks at the door and no one is there, don't open it until someone comes in with you. Depending on where you live, it was probably a barn owl, or maybe a screech owl. Most people don't think about them because they're nocturnal, you rarely see them, and even hearing them is uncommon. But when you do, it's like a portal to hell is opened. The sound is absolutely terrifying. Forget the hoo you imagine. These owls sound like the cry of a demon. I live on a very remote farm. We had just moved into our new house, still half under renovation, a real mess. Around 11 p.m., we were woken by a noise, an ear-piercing, soul-sucking screech. It was so loud that we jumped out of bed, fumbling for a light. Shining a flashlight out the window, I froze. There, just 5 feet away on a tree branch, was a massive owl face staring right at me, screeching directly at my face. Barn owls aren't native to the area, but sightings have been recorded, rarely. It turned out the long vacant house had a rat infestation. Clearly Mrs. Owl had been hunting here for some time, until we started exterminating. I promise, the sound they make is nothing you'd expect. Look it up on YouTube, based on your memory of it. I'd bet that's exactly what it was. About 10 years ago, a woman was jogging early one morning along the levee in Lawrence when one appeared on the levee road and started moving toward her. Terrified, she backed up until she reached the first house on the edge of North Lawrence, then climbed over their back fence and sprinted to the back door for safety. Then, about 5 years ago, I was walking with my 2 young nieces along a gravel country road in extreme northeast Kansas, surrounded by cornfields. As we passed a small waterway that cut into the field, I spotted something at the head of it, a mountain lion, walking away from us, thankfully. My heart nearly stopped. The fear was amplified because I had my nieces with me. The cat slipped silently into the cornfield, and we bolted straight back to the house. It's unnerving to realize just how close these predators can come to homes in our area. I used to work at a private group home, essentially an asylum, though the U.S. avoids that term now, for patients with severe mental illnesses. When the sun went down, many of the residents would become increasingly erratic, almost exactly like you described. Some would even strip down to their shirts and run around uncontrollably. What's striking is that my current neighbor's girlfriend exhibits the same behavior every night once darkness falls. She becomes terrified, disoriented, and completely unable to separate reality from delusions. This has been happening consistently for 2 years. I can hear everything through the thin walls, and it's clear he genuinely cares for her. He handles her with patience and kindness every night as she unravels. It's both heartbreaking and haunting to witness.